Hello and welcome to this video. It's going to be June's book review, what I read in June, and I have read so much this month that there are so many books for me to go through. So we actually have, I think, 8 books to discuss today. I need to watch what I'm saying so that this is not like a 40-minute video, because it has the potential for doing that. Apologies for any outside noise. The weather's alright, so the kids are playing outside, and also I'm being a lazy vlogger and can't be bothered to get my ring light out, so hopefully the natural light is doing alright. So let's get going. Let's get started with the first book, which feels like I read it about 3 years ago, and that is Yes Please by Amy Poehler. I think I'm pronouncing her name right. So this is Amy Poehler's autobiography. I decided to pick this one up because we'd just finished Parks and Recreation, so I was interested to see what her life was like other than that programme. I'd obviously seen her in Mean Girls and maybe 1 or 2 other films, but I didn't know a huge about her. And it was on my Kindle, so I thought, right, let's give it a go. It had a similar way of writing as the Anna Kendrick one that I read the previous month, and I'll link that video up here if you're interested, where it doesn't follow like birth to death, although neither of them are dead, but you know, birth to present day, but it does it in sort of categories of different things, so you're sort of jumping around the timeline a bit, which I've realised I quite like. I prefer that style of autobiography than one that goes chronologically. I found that I preferred Anna Kendrick's because she is a similar age to me, so we're in a sort of vaguely similar stage in life, whereas Amy Poehler is probably that stage on from me because she's had kids and things like that. Not that that's an issue, but I found it slightly harder to relate to her because of that. Also, she talks a lot about Saturday Night Live, which is a show in America that I have never seen anything from. So although it was interesting, I was a bit sort of disconnected from it because it's not something that I've watched or seen or know a lot about. Yeah, so there was that disconnect there for me. Also, I found it quite difficult, at least my copy on the Kindle, there were some sort of formatting problems in that some of the text was really faint, so it was really hard to read. Again, which doesn't help with the enjoyment of the book. So on the whole, I did enjoy this autobiography. It's not my favourite, but it's certainly up there as one of the ones that I've enjoyed the most. I enjoyed reading about sort of comedy actors because it's not a world that I know a lot about or have read a lot about. So it's interesting to get a new insight on it. She does mention Tina Faye, who is one of her good friends and also worked on Saturday Night Live. So I'm now intrigued to read her autobiography, which I think is called Bossy Pants. To see how their experiences of a similar time, as they were both on the programme at the same time, compare, I guess. And I do have it on my Kindle, so at some point we will read that one. So that was Yes Please by Amy Poehler. So the next book I read was a physical one, and that was Prep by Curtis Sittenfeld. Sittenfeld. I should really learn how to pronounce people's names, but you're gonna have to cope with my slightly dodgy pronunciation. This follows Lee as she goes off to boarding school amongst the sort of wealthy families of America, and obviously she doesn't come from that world, so it's how she fits in. It takes certain events from each term, so that's how you follow her journey through the school. But what I will say is this book has the longest chapters I think I have ever read, and if you've been with me for a while, you know I'm not a fan of the long chapter. I find that it makes the reading experience and process longer because you don't feel like you're getting anywhere with it. Saying that, it was quite a good coming of age story. I don't really feel like there's a lot of character development with Lee, but I did enjoy some of the stories that were portrayed in here. I guess a lot of the feelings from this book are sort of finding your place, growing as you're a teenager, learning what it is to be you. As I say, not a huge amount happens in this book, but I did find that the writing was really accessible and I did enjoy the way it was written. I just would have preferred maybe a bit more to move the story along, and certainly not those excessively long chapters. And when I'm talking long chapters, I'm talking like, I think we had like 80 odd, maybe even more than that, pages per a chapter, which is not one. So yeah, there's not really a huge lot to say about Prep because of it really only follows like 3 years of this girl's life and her understanding of, you know, the differences between people rich and not so rich, and, you know, interest in boys and learning to date and that kind of thing. But interesting nonetheless. I'm glad I've read it. I probably won't read it again, but it's worth a go. So that was Prep by Curtis Sittenfeld. As you know, normally I would then go straight back onto a Kindle book, but as I went away in June, if you haven't seen those, I'll link the Dales vlog playlist up there for you. I thought I'd read another book before I then moved on to my Kindle because I obviously wanted to take that away with me. So I read Cilkas Journey by Heather Morris. So this is it's not really a sequel, but the sequel to Tattooist of Auschwitz, and Cilkas' story is mentioned in that book, and certainly I, when reading it, wanted to know more about her, and obviously there was a market for it, otherwise Heather Morris wouldn't have researched her story a bit more. So this follows Cilka post Auschwitz, where the unfortunate woman then gets captured as a sort of prisoner of war kind of thing by the USSR and sent to one of their work camps up in Siberia. So the woman doesn't have a very nice life, it has to be said. There's a lot to take from Cilka's personality and Cilka's resilience and resourcefulness and all of that. She is just an incredible woman in what she had to go through and what she came out with and how she coped with the situations and what happened to her there. Obviously, because of the subject matter, trigger warnings all over the shop, so it's worth looking up those before you pick this one up if you are triggered by certain things. However, with this book, once I realised and once I got my head more around the fact that it's fiction, and what I mean by that is the Tattooist of Auschwitz, Heather Morris sat down and spoke to that man at length and got his story. Yes, there were elements of fabrication and stuff like that, but with Cilka's journey, Cilka has already died, she's never spoken to the woman, she's obviously done a lot of research into the conditions of these labour camps and things like that, but a lot of it is made up from her own brain, essentially. And I did enjoy the story, but only really once I got my head around the fact that it is basically a fiction book. There's a man in this that Cilka falls in love with, who is completely fictional. It does happen that she does marry someone that she meets in a work camp in real life, but the story that is portrayed in this book is not that story. And also I read an article from the stepson who is very anti this book and what is said in this book, and says it's all a load of lies, essentially. So as I said, I did enjoy is the wrong word, but I did enjoy the story. It's largely based around the work camp in Siberia and the conditions there, with a smattering of her life in Auschwitz as and when they sort of linked together, which I think is probably the best way of doing this. Obviously that sort of Holocaust fiction is very popular at the moment, and rightly so, the story should be told, but I think it was wise not to go down that route too much with this one, particularly as her first novel is all about Auschwitz. I do have a little bit of an irk, I guess, in that I think Heather Morris is slightly dining out on these people's stories now. I read the little snippet of the book that she's writing in the back of this, where it's all about active listening, and that's how she managed to get these stories. I'm like, you're kind of exploiting it now. You need to leave it be. You need to come up with something else now. But that doesn't, as I said, did enjoy the book, but go into it realising it's largely fiction and not a true story, not as much of a memoir as The Tattooist of Auschwitz is. So that's Cilkas Journey by Heather Morris. And I went into Sainsbury's and saw these books for £1. So I accidentally bought 2 and then read them one a day. These are part of the reading residency. I think with everyone that's bought, they put some money towards getting books to people that wouldn't have access to them, basically. So the first one I read was The Skylight by Louise Candlish. Now this is a thriller all about a woman who can see into her neighbour's house through the skylight into their kitchen. And events happen. I really enjoyed this. I thought Louise's writing was really good. It gripped me right from the beginning, straight from that first chapter, and it is, you know, 100 pages, just over. There were a lot of twists within that, which I appreciate, and it was just a thoroughly fun read, even though it's a thriller, if that makes sense. It feeds into that thing that we all do, people watching and coming up with stories. But the woman in this, whose name has escaped me, Simone, she takes it that step too far. It was so quick to begin, I did find it fizzled out slightly towards the end. But for a book of, let's see how many pages we're in. A book of 89 pages, it was such a complete story. There was a beginning, middle and end. We got a resolution. I really enjoyed it. I might see if I can find some more of Louise Candlish's fuller novels. I guess this is a novella. I'm just making up words now. But I might see if I can find some of that other work because, as I said, I really did enjoy The Skylight. And then the second one is marginally longer at 104 pages, and that is The Baby Is Mine by Oyinkan Braithwaite, and apologies again if I have mispronounced the name. So the author of this one is the writer of My Sister the Serial Killer, which is a book that I have had on my TBR, my wish list, for quite a while. I look at it quite often and then decide against it. I don't really know why, because it does interest me. So when I saw that she had written this short story and it was £1, I thought, do you know what, that's a good way of trying out her writing to see whether I should bump that book further up and actually buy it. This one follows a guy in Nigeria who gets kicked out by his girlfriend just as Nigeria is being locked down. So he has to find somewhere to go, essentially. So he turns up at his deceased uncle's house to find his auntie and another woman there, and then there's a baby. And they both say that the baby is theirs. So he's trying to figure out the truth, essentially, who the baby belongs to, etc, etc. This one was slower to get into than The Skylight, and I didn't really feel like it had as much of a ending. It didn't really have a resolution, and that's what I liked most about The Skylight, that it was like this real complete story. Saying that, it was interesting and I did like the writing style, so I do think I want to pick up her other book to give it a go, and I think as it's a full novel, I will get that sort of completion that I've missed with this one. I liked the fact that it was so up to date, in that we were talking about the pandemic and about lockdowns and stuff. Normally I wait for books to be in paperback and or several years later, so even if a book is modern and up to date when it gets released, it rarely is for me reading, so it was a nice refreshing change. But if I was only to pick up one of these quick reads, I would have picked up The Skylight. So that is The Baby Is Mine by Oyinkan Braithwaite. So we moved back to ebooks and I read The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. I picked this up for 99p on the Amazon Kindle store when it was on one of its deals, because I have heard so many people on BookTube talk about this book as being the best example of enemies to lovers in sort of romance fiction. So I wanted to give it a go, because I don't normally enjoy that type of book. I was going to say trope, but I don't really know what that word means. I just know people use it. So enemies to lovers is not my favourite kind of romance, and although this was done well, it's just not something I enjoy, and I've realised this now. I probably won't search out enemies to lovers books just because I don't get on with them as well. I never believe that the hatred that they're supposed to have is as strong as it is. Mild dislike, yeah, I get that. Dislike to lovers, if it was branded like that, I would get on with it, but it's always hate to love or enemies to lovers, and that's the bit that gets my goat a bit, because I just don't believe it. But this one follows two people. We have a woman and a man who work in a publishing house who end up vying for the same job. What I did enjoy is that they did have good sort of stepping stones in their relationship. They didn't go straight from hating each other to loving each other. They did go to, you know, semi-friendship, friendship, and then that, which I enjoyed. But I still felt that U-turn was far too quick if you had such strong emotions in one end of the spectrum. One of the positives of this book is these characters had so much sexual tension. There was so much of that. You could just feel it coming off the page, or off the Kindle in my case. And as the sort of smut scenes go, I think they were written really well. Sometimes they can be a bit cringy or a bit jarring, but I think these were written well and placed in the right points of the story. So yeah, I'm sort of in two minds with The Hating Game. I can see why people love it. It's just I'm not a big fan of enemies to lovers stories. So that's The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. So one of the things I've been trying to do this year is to read more classics. And while we were up in the Dales, I thought I would give a Bronte a go. And I chose Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. This is probably one of the most famous classics there is, and I didn't really know a lot about it, it has to be said. And I won't say what I did know about it, because I found that as soon as you tell people that you're reading Jane Eyre, they basically give you whole plot points of it. So that was a bit unfortunate, in that I did kind of know what was going to happen, but only because when I told people I was reading Jane Eyre, they then told me something that I didn't know. So warning, if you don't know anything about classics, maybe don't tell people until after you've read them. With any classic, I probably say this every time I read them, I struggle to get into them at the beginning, and it did take me some time to get into Jane Eyre. Classics always make me feel a bit thick, because they always use words and sentence structure that just doesn't really commute very well in my brain. So with Jane Eyre, I knew what was going on, but I didn't know the minutiae of what was going on. So the overarching story I got, but the little details, they passed me by. And alongside that, I did feel like there was a lot of faff. And I know it was written a long time ago, but you have like a oomphy bit that you're really into it, and then you get 3 chapters of faff. Just find that just slows me down. But I also found, and I don't know whether it's my copy or whether it's across the board, but there were random things that were redacted, and I don't know why. So when she was going to places, it would just be dash dash Shire, instead of saying, I don't know, Lincolnshire or Warwickshire or whatever, or wherever they were going. I'm still not entirely sure where in the country this was set. It also had different symbols, so we had the and sign symbol for etc, which I had to Google because it came up all the time and I didn't know what it meant, and things like that. There was also a lot of French because she becomes the governess for a little girl called Adele who speaks French, and she has like a lady's maid who speaks French. I don't speak French, so all of that dialogue, that passed me by as well. Jane Eyre for me, I'm glad I've read it, as I will be with all of these classics, because it's good to know why they are so popular. I definitely enjoyed parts of it, and certainly the most famous bit that I'm not going to mention because I don't want to be one of those people, but the most famous part of the story, I thought that would be longer and more part of the story, but I did certainly enjoy that time in Thornfield House. I have to say though, Anne of Green Gables so far is my favourite classic that I've read, and we'll have another one next month, so you can listen to me saying I feel thick reading classics, because I'm sure I'll say it once again. So that was Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Apologies if anything has changed. The battery went on my camera and I don't know why, because it had enough. But there we go. So we have made it to the last book. It is Edgar and Lucy by Victor Lodato. This was a book that came in my box of stories box, and I'll link that video up here if you haven't seen it and you want to know what other ones I got. And it's the first one from that box that I've actually got round to reading. This follows Edgar, who's 8, his mum Lucy and their grandmother Florence, and other than saying that, I can't really talk about what happens in this book other than to say please check the trigger warnings, particularly in terms of like suicide and child abduction and stuff, which does, I guess, give away what happens in the book, but I think it's worth highlighting that for you. The writing itself I liked a lot. I think Victor Lodato's way of crafting his sentences and words is good. I did find it a little bit confusing that the narrator of the story changed like within a paragraph. It was all written third person, but it changed so quickly, it jumped around a lot. It also jumped around a lot in the timeline, although saying that, it didn't confuse me as such, it's just, it felt a bit whiplashy, I guess. You were over here and then over here and then over here really fast, which I wasn't that keen on. And if you did see that Box of Stories book, you'll know I read the blurb of it, and I don't feel like the contents of this book really matched the blurb. Certainly for the first, because this is over 500 pages long, so certainly for the first 200 pages I was quite into it. I wanted to know where it was going, the story intrigued me, but then we had like a 200 page chunk where I felt like nothing happened and we could have got rid of it. I feel like this would have been a much better book if it was shorter. I feel like it would have packed more of a punch if there wasn't just a whole heap of nothing for about 200 pages. I was never like loving this book. This was never like a 5-star read or anything like that, but it certainly just kept going down and down and down every time I read it. There were some questionable moments where they're talking about race and abortion, which I didn't feel quite comfortable with. And as I say, it's just too long. The book's just too long. And that really detracts from the story, because you just then don't care about the characters, and you need to care about the characters for this story to work. Although the story itself wasn't for me, I did enjoy the writing, so I think Box of Stories has done okay with this one. I have 3 more to read, so hopefully one of those will be like a new favourite. But I would never have picked it up, but I am glad I've read it. It's not one that I would have gravitated towards, but I am glad I've read the story. I just think it would have been better shorter. So that's Edgar and Lucy by Victor Lodato. And that's it. We have come to the end of this June book review, and I am aware it's been incredibly long, and I hope I haven't talked for too long, but that you've still got a sense of the books and my opinions on them. July, I'm not anticipating on reading half as many books, it has to be said, but we shall see. I didn't expect to read that many in June either. So if you've liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already and you're interested in seeing what I read next month, please click that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!